Hi, welcome, Vulture. Cade Miller Vulture. This is Random Thoughts from County Antrim, and I'm your host, David McDonnell. And this week, as promised, is Random Thoughts Story Swap Roman numeral 1. And I'm not sure if there's ever going to be a Roman numeral 2, quite frankly. But I did put an interesting podcast for you in any event, which I hope you enjoy. Now, I did invite you all to submit a story to me, and I did that in an earlier podcast, and I made personal invites to a number of people. And I had many people, not many, but several, who said they would do it, or they were thinking about it, and they were putting together a video. But in the end, today, I got 2 videos. One of them is by me, and the other story is by a dead guy. No one else sent me a story. So I guess most of you have other more important things to do than participate in this podcast, and that's fine. Perhaps you thought of one but couldn't quite get up to enough nerve to do it, or perhaps didn't have the technical background to do it, or wasn't sure if your story was good enough. But that's fine. That's it. Maybe you get some appreciation for what's involved in the art of storytelling. But I may have a Roman numeral 2. After all, what I invite you to do is send me a story. And when I have enough, when I have 15, 20 minutes worth of stories, I'll have Story Swap Roman numeral 2. Now, for the stories that I have for you, I'll give you a real brief introduction. And the one story is going to start immediately after the first, so there won't be a break between those 2 stories. The video will go from one story to the next immediately. So the first story is one that I told. I was invited a few years back to a television station on St. Patrick's Day. And TV station was about an hour plus drive, and they wanted me there at like 6 in the morning. So I think I got up at like 4 in the morning and tried to look awake during my stories. And the host, as you'll see, was wearing an apron because at the time she just finished doing a bit on Irish cooking in the kitchen in the television station. And she just finished that clip when she went to me. There's also some kids in one of the videos that I did. I did 2 stories for that in that TV program, 2 like 3-minute stories. There were some kids. There were Irish dancers who were there as well, young kids who did a number of bits on some Irish dance. And for my first story I told for them, they took those kids, sat them in a semicircle to be my audience, and I told them a story. And after that bit, I think the kids got in the car and went to school because it was a weekday. But after getting up, I'm sure they got up at 4 in the morning as well. But the story I told, you'll see it's about a 3-minute story, and the video's a little longer than that because, as you know, by watching television news programs, the beginning is banter between the television broadcasters. Then I tell my story, and then there's more banter by the newscasters, including some smart-ass remarks by the weatherman. But please forgive him. He's and just enjoy it as a St. Patrick's Day story. Now, the second clip I'm going to show you is from the dead guy, and his name is Eamon Kelly, and it's from a television program he did in the 1960s for RTE, radio television editing. And you'll get the setting soon enough. And it kind of shows how stories are told, or were told, in the 20th century and earlier, and to a lesser extent today, in an Irish pub. So once you're in the pub, you'll see, you hear music, you see dancers, and then when the music stops, you'll hear a story. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Irish stories, or Irish speakers, there may be a spot or two where you can't quite understand what Eamon is saying. He was from County Kerry. There are many dialects in Ireland, but he has a distinct Kerryman accent. And he also uses some Irish language expressions in the story. But they don't take away from the story if you're an English speaker, because you can get the gist of it, of the expressions, just from the context. But there is one word that he uses that I need to explain to you beforehand, because you can follow the rest of the story, I don't think, with a problem. That word is potin. In some places in Ireland it's pronounced poteen, but regardless, the word is the word for a distilled beverage. And it was a beverage almost always illegal in Ireland. Irish made potin, and they didn't pay taxes to the English crown for this distilled beverage. Now, Irish whiskey, a good Irish whiskey, is made from barley, and only barley. But potin is made from whatever the distiller happened to have on hand. And since it was illegal, it was almost never bottled. One would go to a proprietor who sold potin, and usually he sold it by having his stash under the counter. And the customer would bring his own container to the proprietor, and then the proprietor would fill it up. So I'll talk a little bit about Eamon Kelly after you hear his story. But in the meantime, enjoy the next two videos.
Good morning. Welcome back at day 43 now on Michigan This Morning, breaking down the heritage, folklore, and tradition of St. Patrick's Day. This morning, we have brought in expert David McDonnell.
And McDonnell releases his new collection of stories titled By the Horse of Guinness, which is a great title, by the way, later this year. Today, Jenny and Charles are live with the Irish storyteller and author inside the studio. Good morning.
Yeah, By the Horse of Guinness. Does it get any better than that? Actually, David, your first book, it's gathered quite a few awards, 3 different awards, but you travel all around the country, the state, telling what kind of stories?
I tell legends, I tell true stories, I tell old yarns around the country. I've told some of those in Ireland and several of our storytelling journeys.
Wow,
But,
what an honor.
It's fun. It's just fun. We're gypsies. We live in a car going festival to festival telling Irish stories.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here live with us in Cadillac this morning. But right now, you're about to take us back to the beginning of St. Patrick himself. So without further ado, I'm passing along the microphone.
All right. Well, I was actually going to remind people that today is May-Win Ducat Day. And as you all know, that this is May-Win Ducat Day. And May-Win is a fascinating man. There's very little we know about him historically, but there are much written about May-Win, and there's legend in Ireland about May-Win galore. But I'm going to tell the long version of that story about May-Win at the Senior Center in Traverse City this afternoon. But the short version is, May-Win was a priest and a missionary, and he traveled around Ireland. And he baptized a lot of people. He ordained priests. He founded monasteries. He founded churches, dedicated cemeteries. And by the time May-Win died in about the 5th century, virtually everyone in Ireland had accepted the Christian faith. Now, the language of the church at the time was Latin. Still is to a lesser extent, but it was Latin. Now, the Latin word for an honorable man, a noble man, as certainly May-Win was, is patricius. And so May-Win became to be known in the church as Patricius. Now, later he became a saint, and Patricius in English is Patrick. So he became known in Ireland and elsewhere in the world as St. Patrick, but originally met May-Win. That's a good thing that he became known as Patrick, or else we'd be celebrating May-Win Ducat Day. And everyone across the world would be having May-Win Ducat parades today. Now in Ireland, Patrick is pronounced Padraig, spelled P-A-D-R-A-I-G. So in Ireland, it's usually referred to as St. Patrick, but for short, he's referred to as St. Paddy, P-A-D-D-Y. And in fact, there's some people in Ireland who will get offended if you refer to him as St. Paddy, P-A-T-T-Y. So that is why we celebrate St. Paddy's Day, St. Patrick's Day, and not St. Maywin's Day. Thank you.
Who knew? Maywin Ducock? Did I get it right? Ducock. Guys, it has been a beautiful St. Patrick's Day morning, but the celebrations are just getting started. We hope you get out there all across the north and celebrate this wonderful holiday. You can go ahead and pick up David's most recent book, your first book, available at Amazon, all the local bookstores, but his newest book, By Horse and Guinness, still later coming out this year. Guys, thanks so much for hanging out with us.
You'll get them both.
Get them both. We'll see you later on Michigan This Morning. Happy St. Patty with a D.
With a D. And now we know. That's so interesting to
Everyone's
me.
always told me, make sure you do it with the D, and I didn't know why.
Right, I don't understand.
Now you know.
Why. Michael Stevens, 8:47 on our St. Paddy's Day.
St. Pat Day.
No. Patrick
No, St.
or
Pat.
Paddy?
What about if you just cut it in half?
I
Is
don't
it
think
St.
so.
Pad?
I'm going
or
to go with
St.
the
Pat?
expert.
Yeah.
Paddy.
We've got the expert right on the hallway. You can ask him after weather.
Right, there's Patty and Patrick, but what about Pat? Cutting it in half. Do you guys?
My father never took off his hat, except when he was going into bed and into mass. And my mother said that he slept in the two places. At that time, every man covered his head. There was respect for the brain then, a delicate instrument. As well as covering the head, the hat is a handy receptacle. If you're cut short, you can give a feed of oats to a horse out of a hat. You can collect up apples in the orchard. You can bring in new laid eggs out of the hay shed. You could nearly put a hen hatching in a hat. Well, a small hen, like a bantam or a guinea hen. Headgear gives a man authority. The popes and the kings and the bishops know this. They always cover their heads when they have something important to say. And where would the storyteller be without his hat when he sits by the fireside to tell a story? In olden days, when people would be going to the meadow saving hay, they'd take with them an earthenware jar full of lie ishke. And what was that? It was a mixture of new milk and spring water. For the new milk by itself wasn't the thing for the thirst, and of course the spring didn't have the body in it. And that earthenware jar, it would be put somewhere away from the heat of the sun, and no word of a lie, but it was a great man for the thirst. At that time, there was this farmer in the middle. A very fine day that came after a lot of rain, and he had a lot of help. So that the earthenware jar gave no battle. By 3 o'clock in the evening, the jar was empty and the men were there, their tongues out with the drought. Now, they were in the happy position that there was a public house not too far away from them. But they couldn't afford to spend the time going there and so much to be done. That same year, the farmer, he had a servant called John the Man. And the only thing I'll tell you now about John the Man is he was not too correct in the top story. When he should be shaking the hay, he'd be raking, and when he should be raking, he'd be barking at the dog. That class of a fella. So the farmer said he wouldn't be much out of pocket if he sent John the Man to the public house for a gallon of porter. And he gave him the empty earthenware jar and 1 4 and told him to bring a gallon of it. That's all it was at the time, 2 a pint. Oh my, weren't we all born a bit late? And John, he said, keep your hat well down on your head in case that the sun might lean in your brains. And John, the man, he took the earthenware jar and the 1 4 and fixed the hat down his head, and he set out for the public house, delighted to be going on this errand. And he was singing a little ditty, Murphy stout is good, no doubt. It shoves the navel another bit out. And you see the Amadan, he wasn't watching where he was going, and he hit his toe against something, and he fell out in his face and eyes, made flitters of the jar. He got up with only the handle in his hand, and not even noticing that the jar was broke. He kept going until he came to the public house. And he put the 1 4 up on the counter, and he says to the publican, give me a gallon of porter. And the publican took a big white enamel jug, a gallon measure, and he bent down behind the counter. Now, don't ask me what caper they used to be going on with when the porter came in timber barrels. There'd be a pilgrimage from tap to tap. A big splash out of the flat barrel and a small spurt out of the high one to put a collar in it. And when the jug was full, he put it in the counter, and he says to John the Man, he said, where is your container for this? And it was then John noticed that he had only the handle in his hand. And he said, that's funny, he said. We were together leaving the field. That might be, says the publican, but where am I going to spill this? And that put John the Man thinking, and he threw away the handle, and he began to scratch his head. And he took off his hat to give himself more scope for thought. And he says to the publican, look, he said, couldn't you spill it in there? And the publican did. He spilled the porter into the hat. Wasn't he paid for it? And when the hat was full up to the brim, there was a nice little drop left in the bottom of the white enamel jug. And John the Man thought it was a pity to have to leave it there, the precious liquid, a thing he mentioned to the publican. I know, the publican said, sure I know, but where can I put it? Your hat is full. Well, says John, he said, couldn't you put it in there? So he did. He spilled what was left of the porter into the top of the hat. And John the Man, then taking the hat, between his 2 hands, he walked back to the meadow. And when he arrived at the meadow, the farmer and all the men, they collected around him. And the farmer, when he saw the small lake of porter on top of the hat, he said, John, he said, is that all the porter you brought? Oh, well, now, says John, you must think I'm a right Amadan. I have the rest of it here.
All right, that was a story by Eamon Kelly. Now, if Eamon were alive today, he'd be 107. But he died, alas, in 2001, and he was 87 years old at the time. I wish I would have met Eamon before he died, but he was an actor, made a number of films, but he's most well known for his acting, anyway, for his plays, and he did a lot of plays in Abbey Theatre and the Gates Theatre in Dublin, and also performed in New York and in London. But he was also one of Ireland's best storytellers, maybe the best in the 20th century. He had a regular radio program in the 1950s, and he performed on television from time to time in the 1960s. In fact, that's what you saw was a clip from one of his television programs in the 1960s. And it was that clip was part of a much larger program, was interspersed between some dancers and musicians and Eamon telling a story. And I decided to keep the dancers in the story, the musicians and the dancers in that clip, because I think it shows how things were done in Ireland, in the pubs of Ireland. They were family places. They were I should say, not past tense, but they're multi-generational places. And alcoholic beverages are served, of course, but entire families were there. And you meet friends, other family, you listen to music, you dance, and you tell stories. And I think you got that entire setting from that clip. Now, that particular story with the man with his hat, a man of limited wits, it's a story I've told a couple of times. I've told other Eamon Kelly stories many more times. So I guess you could say I stole Eamon Kelly's stories. But I've told those in North America and in Ireland to the delight of audiences wherever I've told it. Now, musicians do that all the time, and in terms of playing the music of others. And when they do it, it's called a cover. So let's just say, not that I stole Eamon Kelly's stories, but that I covered the stories of Eamon Kelly. All right, I have another video for you coming up next. It's a series of short clips, 7 in all of them less than 30 seconds, and they're 7 different scenes from sports. Now, you might think sports videos for me on this podcast is a bit random, and the answer is yes, it is. But I wanted to make a point, and I'll talk about that point a little bit after the video. And there's a common theme to these videos, which you'll get, unless you're as witless as the guy in Eamon Kelly's story. But we learn a lot of lessons in life, and sometimes it takes a while for us to learn those lessons. Even a lifetime to learn those lessons. But in sports, sometimes those lessons can be learned in a single game, a single race, or a single play. And it kind of makes sports somewhat of a microcosm of life. And that's why I chose these sports videos to make my point. So enjoy the clip.
Word for it. There's a moral to this story.
Yeah, it looked like a coronation for Tonje Pepio. He's getting the crowd. He wants the crowd to cheer his performance, and at the end he gets pipped. He gets pipped by Marin Simon of Washington. And you just can't do this kind of stuff, Lewis.
Still playable. That ball was gone. Look at, they're not even playing. Oh, that's rough. That is rough.
That hit the speaker, and in the past, if I'm not mistaken, that's out. Oh, okay. Taylor Sanders saying it hit the bottom, not the top.
U.S.A. That's why it's legal.
Les Callis, who refs here a ton, comes over to clarify. It is point BYU.
Oh, dude, look at them. They're just
to the whistle.
Celebrating. What just hit me in the ankle? BYU's 7th point.
Elfmeter-Witz beim Spiel um den Oberliga-Aufstieg in Südtirol. Beim Stand von 4:4 tritt Michael Palmer vom ASV Tramin an und setzt den Ball gegen die Latte. Loris Angeli ist außer sich vor Glück. Der Torwart von Dro Calcio stürmt aus seinem Kasten. Palmer hingegen kann es nicht fassen. Beide bemerken allerdings nicht, dass der Ball noch im Spiel ist und ganz langsam und allmählich doch noch den Weg ins Tor findet.
5 defensive backs, including Hakeem, who has come in the 6th. Orton going deep. He's got Watkins, and buckle up. There he goes. And Hakeem brings him down. He just got in there. He plays both sides, and he was chasing down the speed merchant Watkins, an 84-yard connection. A touchdown saving tackle by Hakeem. First and goal, Buffalo.
Well, this is the same route they just missed a little bit earlier, and you see him, he just goes right by Darren Walls. Now, this is unfortunate. Watch him at the end here. He begins to showboat and he eases up a little bit. He never feels Hakeem. That's a rookie mistake by Sammy Watkins. Look at him change his gait and slow up and begin to celebrate around the 10-yard.
Who hits a 1-0 pitch into right field. Runners at the corners with one away. Oh, yeah. Well, they've got Rosario scouted well. And then they go into first base, and Profar's out.
Yadier Molina does not take anything for granted. And then what does he do? He just nonchalantly looks and says, okay, gotcha.
Jurickson Profar was too busy getting the dugout going, and he is out at first base.
All right, so that's my sports compilation video. And what's the lesson? Don't celebrate too early. Wait until the game is over, the race is over, or at least the play is over. And you can understand the exuberance of an athlete who finally accomplishes something they've been working hard to accomplish. But sometimes they celebrate too early. And how is that relevant to the rest of us? Well, we've endured this pandemic for over a year, but the end is in sight. The numbers of cases, hospitalization, deaths are in a general downward trajectory, but we still have the same number of new cases as we did last summer. It's down from the winter and fall, but that's only because the winter and fall numbers were so damn high. In the past few weeks, I think it's the past few weeks, we've averaged like 5,000 hospital admissions per week or per day. And again, that's about equal to the daily average we had last fall. Our death count from the virus on Friday, March the 12th, was 1,707 people. Now who would have thought that we'd be celebrating, doing victory dance, when our death toll was down to 1,707 people. But it is, because I think we're celebrating too early. But I'm optimistic. I think most of us are. But while you're optimistic, think of those videos. Think about those guys who are in the race, in first place, coasting to the end, on the 10-yard, coasting to the end zone. Think of those guys as us. And think of the guy behind him who hasn't given up, who's still running full speed or biking full speed. Think of that guy as the virus. And the virus catches up to the people in first place. That's the lesson from that video. Just so you know, I put that video together earlier this week, and just happened to look at my news feed this morning, and there's yet another interview with Dr. Fauci. And he made the comment, he says, we're not in the end zone yet. Now, I didn't get that sports metaphor from him, because I did it already this week, and he didn't call me this week, so he didn't get it from me either. So we each independently came up with the same metaphor. But that's my random thought for the day. I'm going to wrap this up, but I'm going to show you one more video. It's from a guy I saw on Grafton Street in Dublin. I think you'll enjoy him. And don't forget to visit my new and improved website, clandonald.net, and send me an email at clandonald@gmail.com. And in the meantime, enjoy the Grafton Street busker. Thank you.
Thank you.